Amos Quinn never asked for trouble. Out past the buttes and broken cedar fence lines, he kept to himself, tending the land his wife once loved. Quiet, steady, alone. But trouble don't knock. It finds you. One dusk, Amos spots a small shadow near his fence. A girl, ragged, barefoot, and clinging to a scrap of paper like it's the last thing tethering her to this earth. He takes her in, offers her a blanket, says no more than 5 words. Thought that'd be the end of it. It wasn't. By sunrise, a judge and a cattle baron are on his land, claiming she's trespassing, and so is he. They say his spring don't belong to him, that the land's being reclaimed, that he's outmatched. But Amos Quinn ain't the sort to rattle easy. Not when the deed in that girl's pocket bears a name tied to his late wife's bloodline. Not when the maps say different, and not when a man's legacy is on the line. This ain't just about acres anymore. It's about truth, grit, and claiming what's rightfully his. Think land still matters? Think kindness ain't weakness? Then saddle up and subscribe, partner. The sun was sinking low behind the ridge, bleeding orange across the high desert sky, when Amos Quinn spotted the shape near his north fence. He was on foot, checking the wire after a windstorm had snapped a few cedar posts earlier that morning. The air smelled of dust and juniper, the kind of dry that clung to your throat. He nearly turned back. His legs still ached from the break 2 winters ago. But something by the mesquite caught his eye. A flicker of motion. He paused, squinting. There, just beyond the last fence post, half tucked behind a rock outcrop, someone small, curled in the brittle grass. Amos stepped forward slowly, boots crunching softly against the earth. "You all right there?" he called. The figure jerked, scrambled to its feet. A girl. Couldn't be more than 12, maybe 13, dirty from travel, cheeks sunken, a patchwork dress hanging from her shoulders. She held something close to her chest, an old satchel or maybe a blanket. Wide, guarded eyes stared at him. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Amos said, raising a weathered hand. "Name's Amos Quinn. This here's my land. What's yours?" She didn't answer. "You got folks nearby?" Still nothing. The wind shifted, and Amos caught the faint scent of ash and wood smoke, wagon fire maybe, or campfire gone wrong. She looked ready to bolt, so he kept his voice soft. "You hungry?" Her nod was barely more than a twitch. Amos didn't press further. He just motioned with his head. "Come on, let's get you something warm." They walked back to the homestead in silence. The girl kept 3 steps behind, one hand still clutching that bundle. The porch light hadn't been lit in years. No need, he rarely had visitors. But tonight, as the wind picked up, Amos flipped the switch. It glowed weak but steady. Inside, the place was sparse. One man's quiet life. Wood stove, 2 chairs, a table that had seen better decades. He set a pot to warm on the stove and grabbed a tin of beans and biscuits. The girl sat on the edge of a crate by the door, still not speaking. "You can sit proper if you like," Amos offered, setting the food down. She hesitated, then moved to the table, ate slow, cautious, like someone who'd been punished for taking too much before. "You got a name?" he asked after a while. She looked up, finally. "Lark." Just that, Lark, like the bird. "All right then, Miss Lark. You got folks out there looking for you?" She shook her head. "They left. Weren't room in the wagon. Said I'd catch up if I could." Amos stared at the flame in the stove for a long moment. He'd seen hard things before, but something about the way she said it, plain, without a tear, got under his skin. "You can stay the night," he said. "There's an old cot in the shed I'll drag in. We'll sort the rest in the morning." She nodded, eyes fixed on her plate. By dawn, the frost had burned off, and Amos was out checking the north fence line again when 2 riders approached. Dust curled behind their horses as they trotted in, Judge Horace Ryman and Whit Cormack, the cattle baron from over in Carson Ridge. Cormack sat his horse like he owned the horizon. "Mornin', Quinn," he said, real friendly-like. "Heard you picked up a stray." "Someone left her behind," Amos replied, keeping his tone neutral. "Strays cause trouble," Cormack said, eyes narrowing. "Especially ones hiding on contested land." Ryman cleared his throat. "I've been reviewing old claims. Seems parts of your acreage may have crossed into lapsed territory. Might be auctioned soon if boundaries can't be verified. Amos said nothing, jaw tightening. This wasn't just about land. This was a push. From behind the porch post, Lark stepped out. Her fingers clutched the edge of that old satchel. She looked at Amos, then at the two men, and slowly unfolded a yellowed, crumpled page from inside. "This was my mama's," she said, voice shaky but strong. "It's a deed, says Grant Parcel 3B, signed by a Mr. Eli Quinn." Amos froze. That name hadn't been spoken in years. Eli Quinn, his wife's cousin. Cormac's smile faltered. Lark looked up at Amos. "You know it, don't you?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do." And just like that, what started as an act of kindness turned into the first crack in a baron's grip, and the beginning of something Amos hadn't dared hope for in years. The morning after the confrontation, Amos woke to hoofprints. They weren't his. Out near the southern fence line, cedar posts lay kicked down, 3 strands of barbed wire cut clean through. His cattle, docile Angus, barely moved more than a mile a day, stood huddled tighter than usual near the water trough, nervous, watching the horizon like it owed them something. Amos knelt, running his fingers along the fresh hoof marks. Not wild, too deep, sharp angles, shoes, Cormac's men. He stood slowly, back stiff with more than age. A chill rode up his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Inside, Lark was already up, folding the blanket she'd used the night before with the care of someone who'd never had much to call hers. She watched him come through the door, eyes wide. "Cattle spooked?" she asked. "Yeah," Amos said, brushing off his hat. "Fence, too." She didn't ask more, just nodded and set the blanket aside like she understood what that meant. By mid-morning, a flurry of paper notices appeared around town, posted to the general store, nailed to the blacksmith's shed, even tucked under the sheriff's office shutter. Notice of reclamation auction, signed at the bottom by Judge Horace Ryman. In less than 2 weeks, parcels from Carson Ridge to Salt Mesa would be reviewed for proper reassignment in accordance with county law. And wouldn't you know, Parcel 3B was right at the top of the list. Cormac wasn't just circling anymore, he was carving. That afternoon, Amos hitched his mule and rode into town, Lark riding behind with her arms looped through the saddle's back straps. She didn't talk much, but her eyes never stopped scanning, like she knew now how quick safety could vanish. Main Street was quieter than usual. Folks tipped their hats, but not one lingered. The notice had stirred more than dust, whispers, worry, and the return of a name people didn't want to say too loud. Whit Cormac. Amos tied the mule outside a weathered stone building with faded green trim. Clara Moore's Records and Provisions. It didn't say maps on the sign, but everyone knew Clara had more historical records than the county clerk. Inside, Clara stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled, spectacles low on her nose, sorting through a stack of oilskin-bound ledgers. Her white hair was braided in a tight coil, and a shotgun leaned casual by the pantry door. "Well, if it ain't the most stubborn man in Salt Creek," she said without looking up. "And you brought company." "Need a favor," Amos said simply. "And a look at your water records." Clara's hands paused. Something stirred? More than wind. Clara exhaled hard and gestured toward the back table. "Sit, I'll get the 1848 folder." Lark wandered the shelves while Clara worked. Her fingers hovered over a dusty compass, an old map tube, a brass nameplate that read, E. Quinn, Surveyor. Amos noticed, but said nothing. Let her look. Clara returned, thumbing through a thick packet of old maps, boundary sketches, and faded ink signatures. She pulled one free, flattened it on the table, and tapped her finger over a thin blue line. "That's your spring," she said. "Mountain runoff, natural basin, fed from behind Mosley Ridge." Amos leaned closer. "Don't remember it on my deed." "Wouldn't be. Wasn't registered under your name. Belonged to Hannah's kin," Clara said quietly. "Eli Quinn filed it under his own grant in '48, before he married and moved north." Amos blinked. "So it's family, and still valid." Lark stepped closer. "That name, Eli, It's on my deed. Clara raised her brow. You saying that paper in your satchel matches this? Lark nodded. Clara looked from her to Amos. Well then, she said, voice tightening, this land grant ain't just legal. It's got 2 claims tied in blood. Amos felt something shift then, not just in the room, in him. What's your play? Clara asked. I'm not sure yet, he admitted, but Cormac's pressing, wants us gone before the ink even dries. She reached under the table and slid out another envelope, weathered, sealed. Then you'll want this too. Found it 2 years back. Water rights addendum. No one's seen it because the clerk claimed it never existed. Why'd he lie? Lark asked. Clara gave a tight smile. Because 2 months ago, Cormac gave that same clerk a shiny new horse and a spot at his poker table. Amos exhaled slow. It's getting messy. Clara leaned in, fierce and quiet. Then it's time to get mean. Legal mean. And as Amos stared at the blue ink on that old map, something fierce kindled behind his steady eyes. Because when a man's got truth and water behind him, even a baron best think twice. That night, Amos couldn't sleep. The wind creaked through the rafters, same as it always had, but it felt different now, like the land itself was holding its breath. Lark slept curled on the cot in the corner, her bundle tucked under her arms like a lifeline. Amos sat by the cold stove, hat in his hands, turning over what Clara had shown them. 2 names, 1 map, 1 girl. Hannah's cousin Eli Quinn had been long buried by the time Lark was born, but the grant, the land, had never been sold, and the deed in Lark's satchel carried Eli's signature, dated and sealed. How it had ended up in a child's hands halfway across the territory was still unclear, but Amos didn't believe in coincidence, not when blood and soil were involved. Sometime after midnight, he made up his mind. He rose, pulled on his coat, and stepped out into the cold. The mule gave a sleepy grunt as he saddled up. He didn't leave a note. Lark would understand, or at least know he wasn't gone for good. By lantern light and moon shadow, Amos rode the north trail to the edge of Salt Creek and turned south toward the circuit clerk's office. The town of Bluff's End was 20 miles out and crooked in both layout and morality. The courthouse sat squat between a shuttered saloon and an apothecary run by a man who sold more laudanum than liniment. But Amos wasn't looking for comfort. He was looking for proof. He arrived just before dawn, tying his mule out back and slipping through the alley to the clerk's window. The building was dark, but a low flicker glowed behind the curtains upstairs. Someone was home. He tapped once. A moment later, the window creaked open. Rufus Hall, the county circuit clerk, peeked out, eyes bleary and unfriendly. "Quinn?" Rufus muttered. "What in Sam Hill?" "I need access to the land record ledgers. Parcel 3B, Eli Quinn's original grant." Rufus rubbed his face. "It's barely sunrise." "And it's barely legal what you're letting happen," Amos said flat. "Don't make me come back with the sheriff, or worse, Clara." That name gave Rufus pause. Grumbling, he shut the window, and 2 minutes later the back door clicked open. Amos stepped inside, the smell of ink and mildew greeting him like an old, sour handshake. Rufus lit a lamp. "Ain't much to see. That grant's been quiet for 40 years. I aim to change that." They spent the next hour hunched over brittle parchment and hand-drawn maps. Amos pointed out the spring Clara had shown him. Rufus reluctantly pulled an addendum from the bottom drawer, a water rights clause, half buried behind newer documents. The signature matched. "She ever register it as part of the Quinn homestead?" Amos asked. "Nope, but—" Rufus trailed off, chewing his lip. "There's a loophole." Amos leaned in. "If the grant was never voided," Rufus said, tapping the margin with a stubby finger, "and a blood relative appears with lawful possession, or even stewardship, then technically the claim stands." "Even if she's a minor?" Amos asked. "If she's recognized as kin and someone like yourself acts as guardian?" Rufus sighed. "Then yeah, you'd both have standing." Amos exhaled slow, heart thudding like distant hoofbeats. "Then I need that in writing. Tonight." Rufus hesitated, then nodded. "You'll owe me a bottle of something good. I'll owe you your name not in the paper when this breaks." By sunrise, Amos had a notarized affidavit, the original water grant copied and signed, and a certified petition for guardianship, pending further verification. He tucked them into his coat like precious cargo and rode hard for home. The morning light cut sharp across the land when he crested the ridge. Smoke curled lazy from his chimney. Lark stood outside feeding the chickens, hair braided back, sleeves rolled, face tilted to the wind. She saw him and waved. Amos slowed the mule, his throat thick. This wasn't just about fending off a baron anymore. It was about building something worth protecting. He dismounted, handed her the envelope. "We've got a claim now," he said. Her fingers trembled as she took it. "Is it enough?" "Not yet," Amos said, voice firm. "But it's a start." And as the sun climbed over the Quinn pasture, so did the stakes. Because if the land was going to fight for them, they had to be ready to fight for it. The town's spring barn dance came every April like the last frost, late, rowdy, and full of folks pretending they hadn't been at each other's throats all winter. This year, the air buzzed with more than fiddle tunes and gossip. Talk of the auction had seeped into every crack of Salt Creek, and folks were uneasy. Amos hadn't planned on going, but Clara had other thoughts. "You show up," she said flatly, arms crossed on her front porch. "You walk in with that girl, and you make 'em look you in the eye." "I ain't much for dances," Amos muttered. "Neither's half this town," Clara shot back. "But they'll be there, for the music, the whiskey, and the speech Cormac's about to give." That got his attention. Cormac never wasted a stage. So that evening, Amos saddled the mule, buttoned a clean shirt that still smelled faintly of cedar, and helped Lark into a dress Clara had pressed just for the occasion, navy calico, simple but strong. She stood awkward at first, twisting her hands in the fabric. "You look like you belong," Amos said, and meant it. She gave a small smile. "Not sure I ever did." "Maybe you just didn't have the right place," he replied. The town hall barn sat at the edge of the square, lit up with lanterns and echoing with laughter and boots on wood. The fiddle band played fast, covering the tension. People mingled, but eyes kept drifting to the makeshift stage at the front, where Whit Cormac stood tall in his polished boots, silver spurs catching the firelight. He looked like money and trouble. Amos entered with Lark at his side. Conversation slowed, hats tilted. Some folks nodded polite, others whispered. Clara met them at the back with a nod, her lips tight. "He's waiting for it," she said. "Your move." Cormac's voice cut through the noise, smooth as river stone. "Neighbors, friends, I thank you for your presence tonight. I know there's been questions, but this land auction is about more than borders. It's about the future of Salt Creek." A few scattered claps. "We can't grow if we let old claims and dead ink tie our hands. This county needs order and opportunity." More claps now, stronger. Fear made people clap louder. Cormac smiled, slow and smug. "So with respect, I'll be presenting a proposal next week to expedite land transfer hearings for abandoned or contested plots, Parcel 3B among them." A ripple moved through the crowd. Amos stepped forward, calm but firm. Lark followed, holding a folded parchment in her hands. The room hushed. Cormac's eyes narrowed. "Something to say, Quinn?" Amos didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "This girl," he said, placing a hand lightly on Lark's shoulder, "is kin to Eli Quinn. She holds a valid deed, signed and sealed. I've filed for guardianship. We've petitioned claim." He looked around the barn, not at Cormac, but at the people, neighbors, old faces, farmers and shopkeepers who knew how hard he'd worked that land. "I ain't asking for favors. I'm standing on legal ground. And blood." Lark stepped forward and lifted the paper. "We have the original grant." Cormac's jaw tightened. "That grant was never registered." Clara's voice rose from the side. "Because someone made sure it went missing." All heads turned. Clara walked forward, holding a leather folder in her hands. "I checked records. Water rights linked to 3B were filed. Then, lost. That file went missing the same week you paid the clerk off, Cormac." Gasps. Murmurs. Sheriff Tom Jarvis, who'd been leaning in the corner sipping cider, straightened. That true? Clara handed him a duplicate copy. Ink don't lie, Sheriff. Cormac's smile cracked. This is a circus. No, Amos said. This is justice. Slow, but coming. The crowd didn't cheer. Not yet. But the silence had shifted. Doubt had settled in, and doubt was the one thing Whit Cormac couldn't buy. As the dance resumed in hesitant waves, Amos led Lark outside, the night cool against their cheeks. She looked up at him. You think it's enough? He stared at the stars above the barn roof. Not yet, he said, but we're closer. And as the music played behind them, the girl with no place finally had something the Baron couldn't steal. Proof, witnesses, and the fire of a town beginning to remember what right looked like. By Monday morning, Amos had filed the papers. With Clara's help and a clear signature from the circuit clerk in Bluff's End, he submitted a full counterclaim on Parcel 3B to the county office. The petition included the girl's deed, the original water grant, and a sworn letter from Clara linking the parcel to Eli Quinn's bloodline through both Lark and Amos's late wife. The clerk on duty, young fellow with nervous fingers and a tie too tight, tried to argue the timing. Amos didn't raise his voice. He just placed the notarized documents in front of him and said, "I'll wait for your stamp." It took 6 minutes. By noon, a freeze had been placed on the upcoming land auction. Parcel 3B was officially under dispute, which meant, for the first time in weeks, Amos and Lark could walk Main Street without eyes on their backs. Almost. Because Whit Cormac never left a challenge unanswered. That night, the corral burned. Amos had gone into town to pick up fencing nails and lantern oil, leaving Lark at the homestead with a pot of stew and her books. He wasn't gone 2 hours. When he returned, the sky above the west field was orange. "Lark!" he shouted, racing toward the smoke. He found her barefoot in the pasture, covered in soot, holding a limp calf across her lap. Her arms shook, but she didn't cry. "I heard 'em," she said hoarsely. 3 men. One had a kerchief. They cut the latch and lit it from the bottom. I got most of the stock out. This one got stuck. Amos crouched beside her. The calf wheezed, legs twitching, but it was alive. "You did good," he said softly. "I didn't know what else to do." "You did exactly what needed doing." For a moment, neither moved. The corral crackled behind them, flames dying down into embers. The night was too quiet. Lark finally looked at him, ash streaked across her cheek. "I wasn't scared. Until afterward." "That's how it works," Amos murmured. "Fear's clever. Waits till you've done the hard thing, then crawls in." He helped her to her feet. They led the calf to the pen near the barn, and for the first time since she arrived, Amos saw it. Just a flicker. A real smile. Not forced, not scared, just proud. He wanted to hold on to that. But Salt Creek didn't rest easy. The sheriff came before dawn, knocked once, firm. Lark opened the door, still in yesterday's clothes. "Amos Quinn home?" Sheriff Jarvis asked, not unkindly. Amos stepped up behind her. "Right here." "I'm sorry, Amos," the sheriff said, looking down. "Got a warrant. County judge in Bluff's End claims your submission included altered court records." Amos didn't move. "Altered?" "They're saying the water grant was tampered with." Lark stepped between them. "That's not true. Clara," the sheriff raised a hand. "I believe you, but I got papers here say I have to bring Mr. Quinn in." Amos nodded. "Let me get my coat." They rode into town slow, with the sun just cresting the eastern hills. The wind felt colder than usual. Lark stood on the porch as they disappeared down the trail, fists clenched. Clara was waiting at the jailhouse. "They don't want proof," she muttered to Amos through the bars. "They want time. Delay, confuse, discredit." Amos sat on the cot. "They're scared." "They should be," Clara said. "I sent word to the assessor's office. A fella I knew from my husband's time. He's got eyes on Cormac's dealings." Amos leaned back, hands behind his head. "They won't win this easy," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "No, they won't." That afternoon, Lark returned with the calf in tow, muddy but upright. She brought stew in a jar and sat outside the jail window till sundown. "Don't worry," she told Amos through the bars. "Clara's digging. I'm learning. And I remember what you said." "What's that?" "Truth don't need to shout. just needs to hold steady. And as the jailhouse shadows grew longer, one thing became clear. Amos might have been behind bars, but it was Cormac who was starting to feel trapped. The cell was narrow, smelled faintly of old tobacco and dust, and had a crooked bench that groaned every time Amos shifted. Outside, the late spring wind knocked softly at the shutters like it had something more urgent to say. He'd been in tighter spots before, blizzards, bad cattle drives, one lightning fire, but this felt different, personal, like someone had scripted it in advance and left him only one part to play, the accused. Sheriff Jarvis brought him coffee at dawn, silent but respectful. He didn't say much, just set it down and nodded. "Thanks," Amos muttered, wrapping his fingers around the tin cup. The sheriff lingered. "Never thought I'd be locking you up, Amos." "Didn't think you would either," Amos replied evenly. "But the world's full of surprises lately." Jarvis gave a faint chuckle. "That it is." By mid-morning, Lark returned, this time with a knapsack and a determined look in her eyes. She sat on the bench just outside the bars, arms crossed tight. "I brought your ledger," she said, sliding it through. "Figured you'd want something to keep your hands busy." Amos took it gently, but his eyes were on hers. "You all right?" She nodded. "Tired. Clara's been showing me how to read the plats proper. She's got maps stacked halfway to heaven." Amos managed a smile. "Bet she does." Lark hesitated, then leaned closer. "We found something else." He stilled. Clara appeared in the doorway behind her, holding a leather case and a rolled-up parchment. Her cheeks were red from wind, but her expression carried the kind of pride you didn't wear unless you had something solid in your hand. "This here," Clara said, holding up the parchment, "is an affidavit, sworn and sealed, found it in Hannah's sewing box." Amos blinked. "You went through Hannah's—" "I dusted, not snooped," Clara said firmly. "But this was tucked inside the back lining. Amos, it's from her. A sworn statement she wrote before she passed, connecting her family line directly to Eli Quinn's original water grant." Amos took a sharp breath. "You're sure?" Clara handed the page through the bars. "Signed, dated, and witnessed. Turns out your wife knew someday someone might come knocking. She just didn't want to burden you with it while she was sick." Amos held the paper like it might break. The sheriff stepped into view. "May I?" Amos passed the page through. Jarvis read it slowly, one hand on his belt, the other tracing the ink with a furrowed brow. "I remember Hannah," he said softly. "She taught Sunday school when I was little, carried peppermints in her apron." He folded the page carefully. "This changes things." Clara didn't smile. "It should, and I've already wired the assessor's office. That agent I mentioned, he's on his way." Jarvis turned the key in the lock. "You're free to go, Amos, at least for now." Amos stepped out slow, knees stiff from the bench. Lark stood and wrapped her arms around him without a word. He hugged her back quietly. This girl, who'd once hidden behind a fence post with nothing but a scrap of paper, was now standing firm in the middle of a storm, beside him, not behind. As they stepped out into the sunlight, the wind seemed to shift again, softer now, less like a warning, more like a breath held too long finally let go. Back at the ranch, the corral still smoldered, but the animals were calm. The land, for all its scars, was still standing. Lark followed him out to the pasture line that evening, watching the horizon as the sun dipped low. "You think it's really over?" she asked. "No," Amos said, scanning the hills, "but I think we've got the ground beneath us now." She kicked at a pebble. "You think the assessor'll help?" "He might," Amos said. "But we don't wait. We build." Because the fight wasn't just about land anymore. It was about roots, memory, and the quiet defiance of a family refusing to be erased. The hearing was set for Friday morning in Salt Creek's modest town hall, a weathered building with chipped paint, dusty pews, and a podium that leaned slightly left. Still, it held weight. It was where land disputes were settled, oaths sworn, names cleared, or buried. By 9 a.m., the room was packed. Ranchers in worn hats lined the walls. Shopkeepers sat stiff-backed in their Sunday best. Even school children peered in through the open windows, drawn by whispers of something bigger than another dusty meeting. Amos arrived wearing the same clean shirt from the dance, a steady presence beside Lark, who clutched a folder in her arms like it was armor. Clara was already seated near the front, spectacles gleaming under her bonnet. The sheriff stood at the back, arms folded, watching everything. Then came Whit Cormack. He entered with two lawyers in tailored coats and a box full of documents. His spurs jingled louder than a saloon piano. Eyes tracked him like wolves scenting meat. But the Baron didn't look rattled, just annoyed the delay had lasted this long. Judge Ryman banged the gavel, voice dry as sand. "We'll hear both parties. Keep it civil." Cormack rose first. His voice rolled smooth, practiced. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter. The parcel known as 3B has long sat untended. No registered claim, no taxation. It's void, and per county law falls under review for redistribution." He held up a paper. "This is the most recent map, filed by my office. No water access listed, no easement, just blank space." Whispers rose. Lark flinched. Cormack continued. "Furthermore, we have reason to believe a forged affidavit has been introduced, illegally tying an orphan girl to a family that's been dead since the war." Now Amos stood. "Your Honor, that girl's name is Lark Quinn. She carries a deed from Eli Quinn, my wife's cousin. That deed was found among the personal effects of her late mother, who rode with a wagon train that passed through these hills just weeks before." He looked at the judge, calm but resolute. "We've verified the signature. Clara Moore, widow of a registered county cartographer, has maps and logs confirming water rights to that parcel, signed and filed before Cormack ever sat on a land board." Clara stepped forward and handed the judge a leather case. "Inside, you'll find two matched signatures, Eli Quinn's from 1848 and Hannah Quinn's affidavit from 1883, connecting her directly to the original grant. I personally verified them against county records." Cormack's lawyer snorted. How convenient that a widow and a farmer found these forgotten documents just in time. The judge lifted his eyes. "And yet you claimed the water never existed, until we opened this case." At that moment, the door creaked open. In walked a man in a state-issued coat, his boots dusty from travel. He nodded to the sheriff, then approached the front. "Name's Andrew Keene, state land assessor. Got word from Mrs. Moore here. Decided to make a visit." Ryman squinted. "You're out of jurisdiction." "Maybe," Keene said, "but I brought results. Surveyed the spring 2 miles above Quinn's pasture. Still flows clean, natural runoff. That water source is recorded in state records as non-commercial, meaning it can't be privatized." He turned to face the crowd. "Any sale of this land without acknowledgement of the spring would be null." Cormack's mouth opened, then closed. The judge looked tired, but sharp. "That spring, was it ever reassigned?" "No, sir. And it's still tied to the 1848 grant filed under Eli Quinn." Ryman sat back, fingers steepled. "Well then, I suppose we've got a bit more thinking to do." The murmurs returned, louder now, shifting like a wind about to turn. Lark looked up at Amos. "Did we win?" He kept his voice steady. "We made 'em look." And as the town hall buzzed with uneasy truth, Cormack finally felt what Amos had known for days. You can buy land, lie about water, but when the people start remembering what's fair, no ledger can save you. The fallout came fast. By Monday, the assessor's statement had been copied, stamped, and nailed to the courthouse bulletin board for all to see. Spring on Parcel 3B confirmed as public watershed, historically tied to 1848 land grant held by Quinn lineage. Amos didn't celebrate, not yet. He knew men like Whit Cormack didn't go quietly. But the town had started to turn. For weeks, folks had whispered and watched, but now they spoke, openly, about water mysteriously rerouted, about livestock mysteriously vanishing near auctioned land, about how Judge Ryman's pockets had gotten awful deep awful quick. Sheriff Jarvis didn't say much, but he'd been riding long loops lately, longer than usual. On Thursday, he rode out to Cormack's ranch with 2 deputies and came back with something unexpected. Ledgers. A stack of them. He laid them across Clara's supply counter like firewood. "Found these in the back office. Looks like Cormack's been recording 2 sets of books, one for taxes, one for other dealings." Clara pulled her glasses down. "Auction payments?" "Some," the sheriff said. "Some names of buyers, plots, and hush money paid to 3 different clerks over the last 5 years. Clara exhaled slowly. He's been playing chess while the rest of us were counting beans. That afternoon, Judge Ryman announced he was recusing himself from all land-related cases for the sake of fairness. The statement was printed in the Salt Creek Weekly, but nobody missed the way his carriage rolled out before sunup the next day, westbound, fast. By Friday, a state-appointed marshal arrived. He was young but sharp-eyed, with a clean coat and a no-nonsense stare. He met with Amos in Clara's back room, going over the claim again, slower this time, meticulous. Lark sat beside Amos, quiet but alert. The marshal reviewed every paper twice. "Everything checks out," he said finally. "Her deed, your guardianship, the affidavit from your wife, all tight." "Then it's over?" Amos asked. The marshal paused. "For you and the girl, yes. But for Mr. Cormack, that's just beginning." The next day, the marshal stood outside the town hall and read the charges. Land fraud, document tampering, bribery of public officials. No drama, no gunman, just quiet justice. Cormack wasn't there to hear it. Word was he'd slipped out the night before, headed toward Prescott, his saddlebag heavier than usual. But his name didn't hold power the way it used to, not now. The marshal froze his assets. The county impounded his ranch. And by week's end, a new town land clerk was named, Clara Moore. When Amos asked her how she felt about the job, she said, "Paper's cleaner than people. I'll take it." But the most unexpected change came on Sunday morning, when a notary rode up from the county seat and handed Lark a scroll. "Co-ownership deed," he said. "Filed, signed, official, parcel 3B, names listed as Amos Quinn and Lark Quinn." Lark's eyes widened. She unrolled the page, reading each line like it might vanish. Her fingers trembled as she looked up at Amos. "I'm really part of it?" He smiled, slower than usual. "You always were. Now the world just knows it too." That evening, they sat on the porch, sharing apples and watching the sun settle behind the barn's skeleton. The new corral frame stood upright, not yet finished but sturdy. Neighbors had been dropping by all day to help. No one asked for thanks. They just brought nails and stories. The calf Lark had saved trotted by, nuzzling her boot. She reached down to scratch its ear and whispered, "I think we should call her Ember." Amos raised an eyebrow. "Because of the fire?" "No," Lark said softly. "Because she survived it." He chuckled. "Fair enough." Then a voice called from the front gate, a wiry man in a rumpled coat and dust-covered boots. "Y'all Amos Quinn?" "I am." "Name's Jody Lane, reporter out of Prescott. Heard your story. Thought maybe folks ought to hear it too." Amos tilted his head. "Why?" "'Cause these days, people forget what right looks like. But y'all reminded 'em." And as Lark stood taller beside him, holding her deed like a torch in the dusk, Amos understood. This wasn't just land anymore. It was legacy. And for the first time in years, it was safe. The spring rains came late that year, but they came strong. By May, the hills surrounding Parcel 3B were lush with green, and the creek that fed the spring ran full for the first time in 3 seasons. Water trickled steadily down the cut that led into the pasture, clear, cold, and steady. The land was healing. So was Amos. He stood beneath the old oak just past the corral, sleeves rolled, a hammer looped through his belt. Around him, neighbors worked without asking. Old Micah Sloan drove posts. The Torres brothers from the edge of Salt Creek strung wire like they were tuning fiddles. Even Sheriff Jarvis came by with a pail of nails and a quiet nod. No one spoke of Cormack anymore. There was nothing to say. It had rolled through like a slow train, delayed but not derailed. The Baron was gone, his name now more warning than threat. "Posts leanin' right," Lark called from the gate. Amos looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. Lark stood balanced atop a feed bin, holding a level with both hands. She wore her boots proper now, laces double-tied, dust coating the toes, and the brim of her straw hat dipped just like her mother's once had. "You sure about that?" he called back. "Positive," she grinned. "I've been watching Clara use one all week. That post's got more lean than old Mr. Jenkins at church." Amos laughed. All right, I'll fix it." She hopped down and joined him, taking up the next rail. They worked in rhythm, 2 steps, lift, nail, like they'd always known how. By noon, the new sign was ready. Amos set it in the ground himself, oak plank, hand-carved lettering burned dark against the grain. He stepped back to read it with Lark standing at his side. Quinn and daughter. She stared at the words for a long time. "You sure?" she asked quietly. "'Cause I'm not really—" "You are," Amos interrupted gently. "You were the minute you stepped out of that brush with your chin high and that deed clutched tight." Lark blinked hard, nodded once, then leaned in and whispered, "It's crooked." Amos chuckled. "We'll fix it." That afternoon, the town gathered for a small cookout under the cottonwoods near the spring. Clara made her famous apple pie, the sheriff brought sweet corn, and someone brought a guitar, played slow and sweet, like something from another life. The reporter from Prescott returned, notebook in hand, but mostly he just watched, took notes quietly, smiled when Lark showed off her roping skills on a stray barrel someone had painted like a steer. "You teaching her that?" the man asked Amos. "She's teaching me," Amos said, arms folded across his chest. By sunset, the crowd thinned, but Lark remained near the spring, skipping stones across the surface. The water caught the gold light, and her reflection rippled with each toss. Amos joined her, hands in his pockets. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked without looking up. "Sometimes. I mean, school maybe. I'd like to learn more maps, how Clara reads them." "She'll teach you. You've got her stubborn streak." Lark smirked. "And your quiet one." "That so?" She nodded. "I used to think quiet meant scared. Now I know better." Amos looked out across the pasture, where the grass waved soft in the breeze. "Quiet just means listening, to land, to people, to what matters." Lark tossed one last stone. It skipped 4 times, then sank. She turned and hugged him tight. "I'm glad you found me," she whispered. Amos's voice was rough when he answered, "I think maybe you found me." They stood there a while, no words needed. The wind carried the scent of soil and wood smoke, and for once, no dust. Just clean air, a clear spring, and the steady feeling of something worth holding on to. If you believe land don't lie, and family's what you make of it, then saddle up and subscribe, partner. There's more heart and dust where this came from.